pulls heat from your body 25 times faster than air. That single fact meant a 10-degree evening, not a blizzard, could kill a Paleolithic human faster than any predator in the forest, and it happened constantly. You've been stuck inside for 3 days because of rain. You have a roof. You have heating. You have a refrigerator full of food and a phone full of distractions. And you're miserable. Now remove all of that. Remove the roof. Remove the walls. Remove the stored food, the dry clothes, the waterproof jacket, the hot drink. Put yourself in a forest somewhere in prehistoric Europe 60,000 years ago, during a rainy season that doesn't end for weeks. The temperature hovers just above the threshold that kills you. Everything you need to survive, fire, food, warmth, becomes exponentially harder to obtain the wetter it gets. How do you survive that? Not as a thought experiment, as a daily reality, as the baseline condition of being human for the vast majority of our history. This is the question nobody thinks to ask about ancient humans, because we're usually too busy asking about the dramatic stuff, the predators, the migrations, the wars. But rain is unglamorous and relentless, and it was arguably more consistently dangerous to early humans than almost anything with teeth. It killed fires. It caused hypothermia. It rotted food. It flooded shelters. It lasted for months. And ancient humans not only survived it, they thrived in some of the wettest, most brutal climates on the planet. They crossed rainforests. They lived through ice age winters with precipitation that would shut down a modern city. They figured out, without textbooks or Gore-Tex, how to keep a species alive in conditions that would end most modern humans within days. Let's find out how. Start with the most immediate problem rain creates for a human being without shelter. Not drowning. That's a different conversation. The real killer is heat loss. When you're wet, your body loses heat at a rate your metabolism may not be able to match, especially if the temperature is low and the wind is blowing. This is why hypothermia kills so efficiently even when it's nowhere near freezing. You don't need ice. You need wet clothes, a mild wind, and a temperature around 10 degrees Celsius. That's a British summer. That's a spring night in Central Europe. That's an ordinary day in dozens of places where early humans lived and died. They didn't know this from thermodynamics. They knew it from watching each other die. And so the first, most critical survival skill in wet conditions wasn't finding food or building shelter. It was maintaining core body temperature and the strategies they built around that were more sophisticated than most people assume. Start with fire, because fire is the obvious answer and also a deeply complicated one in the context of rain. Fire and rain are enemies. Wet wood won't ignite. Wet tinder won't catch. A fire that gets rained on dies, and a dead fire in a hypothermic situation isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence written in wet ash. So how did they keep fire alive in the rain? They thought about fire the way we think about electricity, as infrastructure, not an event. Fire wasn't something you made when you needed it. It was something you maintained continuously, because starting one from scratch in wet conditions with bare hands is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Carrying fire was a practiced skill across nearly every ancient culture studied. Embers wrapped in damp moss, fungus, or specific slow-burning bark kept smoldering for hours of travel. Archaeological hearths across Europe show evidence of fires maintained continuously for years, tended like a living thing. Someone's job, in bad weather, was simply to sit with the fire and keep it breathing. That's one of the earliest divisions of labor visible in the archaeological record. Before anyone specialized in tools or hunting, someone specialized in fire. But fire needs shelter to survive heavy rain. And this is where the popular image of the cave-dwelling caveman falls apart. Caves are rare, often occupied by predators, and frequently cold and damp. We picture them mainly because they preserve evidence well. Most ancient humans built their own shelters, and even the earliest ones show real environmental intelligence. Structures dating back roughly 400,000 years, long before Homo sapiens existed, show branches deliberately angled to shed water, leaves layered like shingles so rain ran off instead of through. The same principle as a modern roof, arrived at independently by a brain smaller than yours. By the time modern humans were spreading across the globe, shelters had grown remarkably sophisticated. Mammoth bone structures in Eastern Europe from around 15,000 years ago show heavy bones anchored against wind, hides stretched over the frame, insulation layered inside. These weren't holes to hide in. They were engineered environments. The hide construction deserves a pause because it's one of the most important material innovations in human history, born entirely from wet, cold pressure. Properly treated animal hide is nearly waterproof, scraped, stretched, treated with fat, smoked. Ancient humans were essentially inventing leather. The cognitive leap required is not trivial. An animal is killed today, the hide processed over days, and the finished product protects against weather weeks later. That's abstract planning, solving a problem that doesn't exist yet but will. Evidence of hide scraping tools in Africa pushes this behavior back at least 120,000 years, possibly further, earlier than what researchers typically call modern behavior. Rain didn't just threaten ancient humans. It made them smarter. Now here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If you were dropped into that forest tonight, soaked, with no matches and no shelter, how long do you actually think you'd last? Because it's not the cold that gets people first, it's the decisions they don't know how to make. And ancient humans made those decisions constantly, starting with reading the sky itself. Modern humans experience weather as something that happens to us. We check an app and go inside. Ancient humans had no such option. The smell of rain before it arrives is a real olfactory signal. So is animal behavior shifting hours ahead of a storm, birds flying lower, insects swarming, cloud color and texture changing, wind shifting direction. They read these signals the way you read road signs, automatically, because their lives depended on it. Researchers studying traditional communities today still find levels of environmental literacy that look almost supernatural to outsiders. It isn't magic. It's expertise, refined over generations, and we traded it for a weather app. Terrain mattered just as much as sky. Cold air sinks, wet air pools in valleys. So the difference between camping on a slight rise and camping in a hollow could be the difference between waking up damp and waking up sitting in inches of cold water. South-facing slopes dry faster. Dense canopy intercepts a meaningful share of rainfall before it ever reaches the ground. Natural rock overhangs offered a head start on waterproofing that saved hours of labor. Good shelter sites were used across generations. The same ash layers, bones, and tools stacked at the same locations for thousands of years, proof that the knowledge was passed forward deliberately. The body itself carried adaptations we've mostly lost. The cold shock response, that violent gasp and panic reflex when you hit cold water, is partly a learned sensitivity, and people regularly exposed to cold show a dampened version of it. Ancient humans were cold and wet constantly, which calibrated their baseline response in ways no climate-controlled modern life can replicate. Hunter-gatherer populations in cold climates also showed distinct metabolic profiles. Higher resting metabolic rates in cold conditions, more efficient heat generation from brown fat tissue. They weren't tougher because they were different humans. They were tougher because they were trained by an environment that offered no thermostat. Before we get to the part where all of this comes together, the fire, the shelter, the social structure, I want to know something from you directly. Which of these details surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, because I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what I dig into next. Because surviving rain alone is hard. Surviving it as a group is manageable. Shared body heat is a real survival mechanism. The person on the outside of a huddle is colder than the person in the middle, and ancient humans organized their sleeping arrangements accordingly. Privacy is a warm weather luxury. The firekeeping role was part of a broader system. Younger, more physically capable individuals gathered materials. Older individuals with more experience made calls about shelter placement. Children were kept warm at the center. The group functioned as a thermoregulation system, not just a social one. And this is why the lone survivalist image is mostly modern fiction. Over weeks and months of a real rainy season, humans survive as groups, and the knowledge that made that survival possible was taught, not reinvented. Losing an elder meant losing institutional knowledge that couldn't be replaced quickly, which is likely part of why care for older, non-reproductive individuals shows up surprisingly early in the archaeological record. It wasn't sentiment. It was the rational preservation of accumulated expertise. Food didn't pause for rain either. The waterproofed hide, the carried ember, the angled branches shedding water in overlapping layers, The group huddled around a fire someone spent hours building because the sky said a storm was coming. All of it points to the same conclusion. Ancient humans didn't just survive rain. They built a body of technique, knowledge, and social structure specifically to manage it, more finely calibrated to reality than most modern people ever give it credit for. We have Gore-Tex now, insulated walls, weather radar, drainage systems that move water away before we even notice it arrived. But every one of those technologies is downstream of a very long, very wet, fire-lit night thousands of generations ago. When someone figured out that water runs downhill, that smoke keeps a shelter dry, that animal fat makes leather nearly waterproof, and that staying close to other warm humans is the difference between morning and not. If this kind of deep dive into how our ancestors actually lived is something you want more of, subscribe and stay close. There's a lot more of this story still buried, and I'd rather dig it up with you than alone.